Well, hello everyone. Welcome to another live stream. I like to call the Friday ones live stream prime, simply because we have some amazing topics, but also amazing guests like today's guest, our dear brother Islam Critiqued. Brother, I am so honored to have you. Thank you so much for making time for us. Welcome to the live stream. You definitely have honored me by accepting my invitation.
Well, thank you so much for the invitation. And I commented to you that I'm underdressed because I put a collared shirt on especially for this. And you have your nice collared shirt and your sport coat, but then you show that awesome intro. And I don't have anything like that on my channel. So I'm underdressed and underpresented, but here I am anyway. So thanks so much for the
Hey,
invitation.
I can rent you that intro. Don't worry about it.
Oh, you can. It is okay. How much? How much?
For you for free.
Oh,
Well,
excellent. Yes.
yeah, thank you again, brother. Folks, today you're in for a treat. The topic in and of itself was really intriguing to me when Islam Critique mentioned it to me. And obviously, I'm familiar with these things, but I didn't know if many of you know about it. And you can see that you will be blessed by the topic. But I want to thank those of you who are waiting for us and thank those of you who will be joining us right now and watching. As always, please pay attention to our moderators and pay attention to their reminders about rules and regulations. They're here to just maintain order in the house. We want to make sure we do not get distracted from the main topic. The topic is Muhammad, mysticism, and magic. So that's what we're going to talk about. If you have any question related to this, by all means, type it down. We will keep an eye on it and we'll make sure to get to it in the appropriate time. With that says, my brother, I am going to turn it over to you and tell me, first of all, or tell the audience a little bit about yourself, whatever you feel comfortable sharing, of course.
Sure. I run the channel Islam Critiqued, and I uploaded the first video to that in January of 2018. So here we are about 2.5 years later.
Amazing.
And about 26,000 subscribers and about 200 videos. And here we are. I try to keep some variety on the channel, at least I think I do. I hope I do. And so I do have some traditional critiques of Islam, things like women in Islam and jihad and so forth. I also have something that I would encourage Muslims to check out, and that would be the Biblical Insights series. Before I started that series, I realized that Muslims very rarely, if ever, hear the Bible outside of the context of polemics and apologetics. And that seems to me to be a real shame. Unfortunately, they hear the Bible through the lens of people like Zakir Naik and their apologists. And so I thought, why not start a section of the channel that just has biblical teaching that's completely absent of polemics and apologetics. And so that's what the Biblical Insight series is. And some Christians benefit from that as well. I also have, to use the words of a Patreon supporter recently, really weird stuff. So I have some weird stuff on my channel, like Jewish mysticism and the influence that that had on Islam. And I'll probably be putting some evil eye material up and some magic up later on as well. And so it's important for a couple of reasons. From the perspective of source criticism, there's a whole lot that Jewish mysticism explains in both the Hadith and the Quran. And it also gives us an idea of the theological framework that Muhammad had for the supernatural world and how he was to interact with it. And so we can then take that framework and do a comparison to the Bible, the biblical prophets, to Jesus, and see if there's continuity or discontinuity. So that's why I think these weird topics like what we're going to cover tonight are very important.
Absolutely. And I've always, as I mentioned to you earlier, enjoy your style, and I also enjoy your knowledge. And I think, like I mentioned, people are in for a treat today. So, brother, take it away from here and let's talk about this particular topic for today about Muhammad, mysticism, and magic. What do you mean by that? What do we mean by mysticism for the benefit of those who are watching?
Sure. So mysticism is, in the context of Islam as I deal with it, is Merkabah mysticism. And we'll just do a brief overview of how Jewish mysticism interacts with Islam, and won't really cite a lot of sources or anything like that. It's very complex material, and I have this unpacked in great detail on my channel. But then we'll just move from that into things like the evil eye and magic. But there are parts of the Hadith, for example, like Muhammad's encounter with Ibn Sayyid. He's a young Jewish boy. Muhammad sneaks through a palm grove up on Ibn Sayyid, who's covered in a blanket, and he's muttering to himself. The boy's mother, unfortunately for Muhammad, sees Muhammad and says, "Ibn Sayyid, Muhammad's here." And so the boy snaps out of his trance. And then there's a conversation that ensues. In some cases, it's not altogether clear if the boy is back in his trance or not. And so there are several questions that are asked. Muhammad quizzes the boy effectively. What is the dust of paradise? Muhammad asks the boy what he's thinking, what Muhammad's thinking, because he wanted to test the psychic powers of Ibn Sayyid. And the boy actually tells Muhammad what he's thinking. He's thinking about the Surah of Smoke. Very interesting that this kind of thing is in the Hadith, because it's quite embarrassing for Muhammad. And so what you have, everything from the setting to the boy being covered up in a blanket, this is all explicitly Merkabah mysticism. And Merkabah refers to the throne chariot in Ezekiel. It is typically simply a Hebrew word which means chariot. And so you see this in all kinds of contexts in the Hebrew Bible. But when you add the modifier mysticism to it, Merkabah mysticism, now we're talking about the rabbinic speculations that extended from chapters in the Bible like Ezekiel 1 primarily, as well as Ezekiel 10. And so from this rabbinic speculation sprang this whole notion of Jewish mysticism, or Merkabah mysticism. And this is something that developed during the first, second, third, fourth, fifth centuries in Jewish thought. And the whole idea was that these Jewish rabbis wanted to, through mystical means, ascend to the throne room. They wanted to see what Ezekiel saw. And so this seems to be one way of Jews dealing with the loss of the temple, once again in the first century. And so you see a historical parallel. What happened in Ezekiel's day? Well, you have the exile and the destruction of the temple, and then that repeats itself in the first century. And so you have rabbis trying to duplicate the vision that Ezekiel had. Because of what the rabbis did with the Hebrew text, their rabbinic exegesis or eisegesis, the events in Ezekiel 1 get placed elsewhere in the Bible, like Sinai, or another example would be the Red Sea crossing. And so when we look at all of these things and we put them together, once again, I won't go through the details, but we see, for example, why in Surah 2088, the golden calf lowed. This comes from Jewish mystical tradition, which actually involves the tearing away of one of the oxen from the Merkabah of God, from his throne chariot. And that actually becomes the calf that the Israelites worship. And so the calf is actually animate. There's also the ancient belief of the power of dust. And so in Surah 2096, what is this mention of the dust of the footprint of the messenger? And how does that make the calf animate? It's again an ancient magical belief. The mystics were applied tests as they ascended to the throne room. When they get to the sixth Haykal, or the sixth palace, there's a test. That's the water episode. And the door opens and you see this palace, and it's polished glass, but it looks like water. And if you say water, you're a liar, you're a fraud, you don't deserve to get into the throne room, and there's some sort of very terrible death that ensues, a beheading, or you're impaled on a bunch of iron bars. It's really rough stuff. And so in Surah 2744 in the Quran, we find that the Queen of Sheba goes up to Solomon's palace, and the door opens, and guess what she sees? She sees a palace full of water. She even pulls up her robe a little bit so that she doesn't get her robe wet. When Solomon sees this, guess what? She's exposed as a fraud, and she realizes her wrongdoing, and she submits to the Lord of the worlds, just like any character in the Quran. They're just stock characters, and so she becomes a proto-Muslim. The Merkabah mystics would cover themselves when they were engaged in their mystical activity, because the goal is to ascend to the throne room. And so the cloak would be one way of shielding oneself from the divine glory if you are, in the unlikely event, successfully, if you make it successfully to the throne room, because it's rare for mystics to do this. There aren't many worthy mystics. And so when we look at the Quran and we see Surah 73:1 and 74:1, how do those surahs open? It's O you wrapped in a cloak, O you wrapped in a garment. Of course, in book 1 of Sahih al-Bukhari, when we look at how Muhammad received his revelations, he's said to have cloaked himself. And so from this one topic, this one fascinating topic of Merkabah mysticism, we see that it reaches into various strands of both the Quran and the Hadith, and it provides us with a lot of explanatory power for some otherwise very confusing verses and very confusing narrations. It also provides us with this, once again, theological framework. We can take the theology of Merkabah mystics and the theology that we see reflected in the Quran and the Hadith, and we can test them and say, okay, is this consistent with the biblical prophets? Is this consistent with Moses? Muhammad's supposed to be the prophet like Moses. And so similarly, as we proceed tonight, what we want to do is look at the evil eye. We want to look at magic in the Hadith, and we'll interact with the Quran some as well. And we don't want to do this from the perspective of, okay, Muhammad was bewitched. He recited satanic verses that reduces the his reliability. I believe that that's true, but that's not our approach tonight. We simply want to understand how Muhammad conceived of the supernatural world and how to interact with it. And we want to ask if this is continuous or discontinuous with what we see in the Bible. So that's our objective, and that's why it's important to study this really weird stuff.
Absolutely. It's fascinating how you tie these things together. Thank you for doing this. And people might be surprised that Islam as a religion would pay attention to subjects like this, but you'll be surprised when you hear today what we're going to address, and especially the material that our brother has prepared, that Islam actually is centered around issues like this. In fact, if you go to West Africa, if you go to East Africa, if you go to parts of Asia or Southeast Asia, you'll see that animism or animistic Islam is part of the fabric of these cultures, and the use of evil spirits and evil eye and the fear and so on and so forth. So that's why it is definitely fascinating. Thank you again for everyone to join us here. Thank you for the moderators. Please pay attention to everything the moderators are saying, and we thank our brother also for making time for us. So what is it that you want to focus on now? You did mention the evil eye, for instance. Is that something you want to venture into right now, or is there something else you want to address first?
Sure. Let's start there. And I'm curious about your perspective on this growing up as well, and obviously a place far, far away from me. But for me growing up, I heard the phrase evil eye, and it was simply idiomatic. If you are looking at someone angrily, you're looking at them with the evil eye. But that's all it was. I didn't know about any of the background. I didn't know it was a 1,000 years old belief or anything like that. So, but you growing up in the Middle East might have been different. Is that correct? Or what did you hear about the evil eye as you were growing up?
It's real, actually, and people, whether they verbalize it or they try to keep it, a secret, you see signs of it. For instance, a baby is born, and all of a sudden they have like a little pin with an eye, a blue eye, usually on it. You know right away what that means. Or sometimes it has like Quranic passages. Yes, it's in gold, sure, but you know also what that means. I remember one time my very close friend. I mean, he bought a car. I think it was a Porsche. And I commented on it, and then he had an accident the next week. And guess what he did? He blamed me for that. He says, it was your evil eye that caused this to happen. So it does definitely happen. I'm going to try to share a screen real quickly with people. Let's see if I am successful in doing it in such a short notice here to try to show people what I mean by that. We're going to see. I'm not so sure that I can find it at the moment. I have some images of the evil eye, basically, and I wanted people to see it because you can go and see that sometimes the evil eye is a blue, eye by itself. You can wear it in a necklace. Sometimes it's in a pen. Sometimes it's in the so-called the hand of Fatima. So it is part of the culture that I grew up in.
That's interesting. And in the folklore, blue-eyed people are more capable fascinators. That is, they're more capable at casting the evil eye. So blue-eyed person here, I hope I don't incapacitate you during this live stream. That wouldn't be very good, because then we'd have to employ one of these methods to break the power of the evil eye. So hopefully there won't be any risk to you or to any of the viewers with a blue-eyed person like me. But we'll start with a definition of the evil eye. And so this is from J.H. Eliot. He did an extensive survey of evil eye beliefs in the ancient world, and he broke it down by geography. And so you have, Mesopotamia, Syria, Rome, and so forth. And I think it ended up being a 4-volume study, so it's quite exhaustive. So his definition is very detailed. We all know what the evil eye is, but maybe putting it into words is a bit difficult. So here's J.H. Eliot. He says, the concept of the evil eye is a millennia old and geographically widespread folk belief complex, and one of the most widespread and behaviorally influential beliefs in the ancient world. This belief holds that certain individuals, such as humans, gods, demons, animals, and mythological figures, possess an eye whose powerful glance or gaze can harm or destroy any object, animate or inanimate, on which it falls through the power of their eye, which can operate involuntarily as well as intentionally. Such evil eye possessors, also known as fascinators, are thought capable of injuring, withering, or obliterating the health and life, means of sustenance and livelihood, familiar honor, and personal well-being of their hapless victims. So that's a very detailed definition. Here's a shorter one from the Journal of Religion and Health. The evil eye is a very ancient superstition characterized by the belief that certain individuals, sorcerers, witches, may by virtue of their gaze cause another person, animal, plant, or other property to become ill, die, or otherwise suffer grievous harm. And that's from Alan Berger's 2012 article. So a couple of things to pick up. This is an ancient belief. It is very widespread, and it's seen to affect both animate and inanimate objects. And so it's going to be interesting as we go into the Hadith to kind of see, okay, is there similarity? Did Islam basically adopt this evil eye belief, or did it make any changes? Was it Islamized? And I see it up on the screen now. That's the
Right.
picture you were
So
talking
people
about.
can see what we're talking about here. You can see that there is some element of an evil eye, the blue letter here. There is Quranic passages. Believe it or not, this is chapter 113, 114. This is Ayatul Kursi, which is the verse for the throne of God. This is just MashaAllah, meaning, may God basically, in amusement, you say something like that to someone when you see them. It's like, hey, it's amazing what I'm seeing. May the Lord protect you. Technically, that's the intent behind it. This is the hand of Fatima. And, it's just an interesting thing, really, when you think about it.
Yeah, it's interesting that outstretched hand is supposed to be one of the amulets that protect one from the evil eye. That's very interesting. So I'm going to try to keep up with these hadith and just copy paste them in the live chat as we go along. That way people can keep up if they want. Some of these hadith are quite long, and so I'll try to condense them as we go. So let's start to build our knowledge of the Islamic conception of the evil eye. And this actually provides us with a really easy bridge to move on to magic in general. So here it is, very simply stated, Sunan Ibn Majah 3506, and this is in other traditions as well. Muhammad said, the evil eye is real. So there you have it. Muslims, it's especially Western Muslims, this is not an option for you to believe that this is part of folklore. You have to believe that it's real. And to what extent is it real? It's actually extremely powerful. Listen to how Muhammad describes the power of the evil eye as I drop this hadith into the live chat as well. So this is what Muhammad says in response to a question or a problem. The children of Jafar have been afflicted by the evil eye. Shall I recite Ruqya for them? And we'll talk about that a bit later. In a couple minutes ago, Al-Fadi mentioned surahs 113 and 114, and those are a big part of the Ruqya or the incantation. But these incantations are not always surahs 113 and 114. Sometimes they're pre-Islamic as well, and we'll look at how this all works out. So Muhammad continues, should I recite an incantation for the evil eye? And Muhammad says, yes, for if anything were to overtake the divine decree, it would be the evil eye. And so you have the divine decree up here, and then you have the evil eye right below it. It's a very powerful thing. Another hadith similarly states from Jami al-Tirmidhi 2062. Muhammad says, and this is from Ibn Abbas, if there was anything that could overcome the decree, then the evil eye would overcome it. So we're going to want to look as we go through these traditions of, okay, when someone was under the effect of the evil eye, how would they cure themselves from it? How would they release themselves from the power of the evil eye, given that it's very close to the decree of Allah in terms of its potency? So here's an example. I'm going to try to get through this hadith without laughing too much, and I'll drop this in the live chat as well. This is quite comical. This is from well, it's in a couple of collections, but Malik's Mawada is where I'm quoting this from, book 50, hadith 2, and we get to see here the effects of the evil eye in a real life event, according to this hadith. So you have two people. You have Amir ibn Rabia and you have Sahal ibn Hunayf. Okay, so those are the two people involved in this story. Sahal is doing ghusl. He's bathing. Okay, and Amir saw him and says, "I have not seen the like of what I see today, not even the skin of a maiden who has never been out of doors." So Sahal apparently has really nice skin, and Amir has never seen anything like it. So this is going to be one of the four types of the evil eye in Islam. You have the evil eye that has no wicked intentions. You have the evil eye that does have wicked intentions along with it. You have the evil eye that you can cast to yourself. That's what we would call ego, egotistical or something like that here in the West. Then you have the evil eye of the jinn. But from ancient times, thousands of years ago, the evil eye is associated with envy. You see something that someone has, and you can say, okay, I want that, or you can say, I want that, and I don't want them to have it. You can envy them. And so this is the power of the evil eye that we're looking at in this context. So
that's right. That's
yeah,
right.
so this is envy, okay? And not even the skin of a virgin looked as good as the skin of Sahal. Now, here's what happens. The envy is occurring. He has, the evil eye. And Sahal, the person who was taking a bath, fell to the ground. Okay, very interesting. So it's instantaneous. He drops to the ground. Then Muhammad comes up and they say, okay, can you do anything about Sahal? He's dropped to the ground and he can't even raise his head. And Muhammad says, do you suspect anyone? And they said, we suspect Amir ibn Rabia. And so Muhammad summons Amir and was furious with him. And he says, why does one of you kill his brother? And Muhammad says, why did you not say, may Allah bless you? And then he says, do ghusl for it, or do ghusl for it, bathe for it. Now, this is very interesting because this is still something practiced in the Muslim world today. Listen to what Amir does. Amir washed his face, hands, elbows, knees, the end of his feet, and check this, inside his lower garment in a vessel. Then he poured the water in that vessel over Sahal. And Sahal went off with the people and there was nothing wrong with him. It's interesting that in a modern survey of this material, Hussein Rasool is an Islamic psychologist. He wrote a book back in 2019 about the evil eye and psychology from an Islamic perspective. And he quotes this hadith and he refers to the ways that scholars have said, okay, this is one thing that you need to do, or one thing that you can do if you're under the influence of the evil eye, is you bathe in water and then you dump that water over someone. And of course, Muhammad had some interesting ideas about bathing anyway. In some sense, bathing, he says in one hadith, washes the sins off of you, every body part. And so it's interesting to see all of Muhammad's different concepts of bathing. Here, it doesn't have anything to do with washing away sin, but it seems to have something to do with the ancient belief of the magic in water. Water seen to be life-giving in the ancient world. It's what keeps us alive, right? And so in some sense, it must have the essence of the gods in it, obviously in an ancient polytheistic setting. And then, of course, that develops to, okay, well, it doesn't have the essence of the gods, but it has some sort of magical potency. And so you can see how these beliefs would develop over time. And so this is why I have to be careful with my blue evil eye, Al-Fadi, because if I incapacitate you, then I have to come to wherever you are. I have to bathe, and then I have to dump that over you. And I don't know if you'll be okay with that.
I hear
So
you.
there are more ways that we can break the power of the evil eye in the Islamic context. Okay, so this is where we get a little bit into magic, and we'll get more into this as we go along. So the Prophet said in Sunan Abu Dawud 3884, no spell is to be used except for the evil eye or a scorpion sting. And this is where we kind of bring up that question before. Okay, what do we mean by spell, by incantation? Is this Surah 113 and 114, or is it something else? Let's proceed a bit further. This is from Malik's Muwatta again, book 50, Hadith 3. If you want to check these out, there's actually a section on the evil eye in Malik's Muwatta, and it systematizes all of these for you. So a man came to Muhammad, and with the two sons of Jafar ibn Abi Talib, he said to their nursemaid, "Why do I see them so thin?" The nursemaid said, "Muhammad, the evil eye goes quickly to them," or directs this to Muhammad, called there the messenger of Allah. "Nothing stops us from asking someone to make incantations." And here the translators add using ayats of the Quran, but that's not always the case. This is trying to, once again, Islamize these practices or Islamicize these practices. To make incantations for them, except that we do not know what of that would agree with you. And so, hey, we have these incantations. Can we use them? That's the question. And Muhammad says, make incantations for them. And then here again, we have the power of the evil eye. Had anything been able to precede the decree, the evil eye would precede it. And so you need to fight these, the evil eye with these incantations. We move now to Sahih Muslim. This is Salama. Salama is connected with these mystical traditions more than any of Muhammad's wives. I haven't done a systematic study of this, but when you look at who's connected to what in the Hadith, we see Salama fairly frequently with these magical practices. And so Salama, the wife of Allah's apostle, reported that Allah's messenger said to a small girl in the house of Salama that he had been seeing on her face black stains, and told her that was due to the influence of an evil eye. And he asked that she should be cured with the help of incantation. And so this is, Muhammad once again advocating the use of an incantation to cure the effect of the evil eye. And so we haven't fully developed Muhammad's framework for the supernatural world, for magic and so forth, but we can pause at this point and say, why do we find Muhammad, with his supposedly pure monotheism, ordering or requesting that his followers do things to relieve the effect of the evil eye that aren't directly related to Allah?
Indeed.
One would expect that Muhammad would constantly refer to the power of Allah or to prayer or something like that, yet we find him advocating bathing, for example, or using incantations. So it's just an interesting point to stop and say, is this what we would expect to see given the modern narrative about Tawheed? But we also have some other ways to break the power of the evil eye. And I'm going to copy paste this into the chat once again. Someone just said, I saw as I copy pasted, with respect, how can he say the evil eye with a straight face? I'm laughing out loud here. Okay, well, I'm glad it's entertaining. But we'll get.
But then again, this is Islam critiqued, so that's why we have him here.
Yeah. Most of the time, I'm so focused on recording that when I, make a joke or something, I don't even think about it. So people ask, how do you keep a straight face? Most of the time, I'm not even focusing on the script. By that time, everything is written. It's just a matter of focusing on, inflection and so forth. So another way you can break the power of the evil eye. All right, here we go. We have Salama again. What a surprise. This is Uthman ibn Abdullah says, my wife sent me to Salama with a cup of water. And I'm actually quoting the hadith that I copy pasted in the chat. I'm actually quoting this from Reliance of the Traveler, so it has a bit more explanation. My wife sent me to Salma with a cup of water in which to dip a lock containing some of the prophet's hair whenever a person was suffering from the evil eye or an illness. They would send her a vessel of water, and then we have a gloss that's added, which Salma would dip the hair in for treating the ill by drinking it or washing with it. So once again, when we're looking at the solutions, the medical solutions provided by Muhammad for curing the effect of the evil eye, here it's a lock of his hair. That lock of his hair is dipped in water, and then that water is either drunk or it's poured over the person. And this is supposed to help cure the effect of the evil eye. Very interesting stuff. And this is going to get us into the broader topic of magic, because hair, once again, like water, has a very ancient presence in magic. And there are a lot of very strange beliefs about hair that we won't get into. One of these things would be not magic, though. We'll talk about that a little bit later, but just keep this in the back of your mind for now. Muhammad's hair is one way to cure someone from the spell of the evil eye. So transition a little bit into magic right now and say, okay, what is permitted in the Hadith? Is sorcery, is magic permitted? And I covered a definition of the evil eye. I'm not even going to try to define magic. I read a 20-page discussion recently in a monograph arguing about the various definitions of magic. And so I'm not even going to go there. We can just say magic generally is the manipulation of supernatural forces for some purpose, and sorcery would be the use of that magic.
That's right.
And we can let the scholars of magic debate that all they want. So we want to ask, as we continue to build our picture of Muhammad and magic and the evil eye, is sorcery forbidden in the Hadith? And the answer is yes. And then we say, wait a second, maybe the answer is no, I'm not really sure. And so we do have some conflicting Hadith, and we'll see that the best way to get an understanding of this is to look at some specific cases. So
Yeah,
first of all,
my brother, in Saudi, sorcery is considered to be a crime under Sharia law, and I personally have watched people getting beheaded because of this. They were caught committing this, so it is indeed there is a conflict here that one cannot understand, basically.
And we'll see some of that conflict in these hadith is shirk, which is very interesting because Muhammad prescribes all of these other things like spells, incantations, bathing, and his own hair as a way to, defeat this magic. And so it's very curious when we think about shirk, where does this cross the line? Because Muhammad flatly says, sorcery is prohibited. It's shirk. Anyone who wears an amulet is subject to its own power and so forth. Yet we find him saying it's okay to do this. And so one thing that we'll keep in mind just, for later on is, what is Muhammad's concern? And in the hadith, it's shirk. We'll see later when we look at Deuteronomy 18, of course, Moses doesn't want the Israelites worshiping the gods of the other nations. But Moses' concern is general. It's interaction with the supernatural world. He knows that the things that the nations around Israel are doing can get them in trouble. And so his focus is on, no, you communicate with God, you communicate with the supernatural world in a way that God approves of. And so even though some of these things are prohibited in the Hadith, we'll see that the reason is different from what Moses has in mind. Their focus is on different things. So I want to be fair to our Muslim friends out there and say that sorcery is flat out forbidden in the Hadith. This is, well, I'm going to sound like a Muslim now. This is a weak Hadith, okay? This is Da'if from Sunan An-Nasai 4079. It was narrated that Abu Huraira, well, there we go again. How many?
You're hanging around Hadith too much, brother.
He said, the messenger of Allah said, whoever ties a knot, and we'll talk about tying a knot and blowing on it. We'll talk about that later. Whoever ties a knot and blows on it, he has practiced magic. And whoever practices magic, he has committed shirk. And whoever hangs up something as an amulet, this will be something that people wear like a charm to try to ward off the effects of various black magic. Whoever does that, you're entrusted to it. And so clearly, again, to be fair, we do have Muhammad saying, albeit in a weak hadith, that magic is shirk. There are a couple of other similar ones. Okay, so sorcery is forbidden. Okay, now we move to step 2. Sorcery is not forbidden. So I'll quote this hadith from Sahih Muslim. I'm actually quoting this from the Encyclopedia of Islam, their article on Ruqya, so I can't post this link. It's not open source, but
by the way, brother, some are saying that the links you're posting, unfortunately, they're not showing. So if you can share them with me later by email, I'll go ahead and post them.
Yeah, I wasn't sure what your policy was as far as posting links.
This is the first time, honestly. I didn't realize that because I have moderators. Supposedly, if you try to post it, it won't show up. So I'm sorry. I can make you a moderator if you like.
Oh, we have a couple of long hadith. If you want to, that's fine. I could post those in there. It's funny, I see them on my end, but I guess because they're links, they're not showing up for everyone else. Which is,
no problem. You can share them with me, and I'll definitely make sure they get there.
Okay, you have to be safe with these things these days, unfortunately. So I can see why you don't want links in the live chat. But we left off at step 2. Sorcery is not forbidden in the hadith. And again, I'm quoting from the Encyclopedia of Islam, 2nd edition, their article on Ruqya. And this is quoting Muhammad from Sahih Muslim. And he says, have recourse to magical means. And this is in reference to a slave who has been affected by the evil eye. So we have sorcery is forbidden, and then sorcery is not forbidden. And we have another example here as well. This is asking Aisha about incantations. And Aisha says, Allah's messenger has granted its sanction to the members of a family of the Ansar for incantation in cursing every type of poison. And so clearly in some context, namely the evil eye, and here we have poison as well, you can resort to forms of magic in incantations and so forth. And so it is permitted, and it's not permitted. And this is because of Muhammad's concern for shirk. As long as the incantation, as long as the magic isn't shirk, it seems to be permitted. Otherwise, we simply have a demonstrable contradiction in the Quran. And we talked about Ruqya before. And in the hadith, like I said, these translators want to connect us to surahs 113 and 114 a lot, because otherwise we just have mentions of all these incantations in the hadith, and it looks rather magic and, quite frankly, pagan. But these incantations are not always from the Quran. So here's an example from Sunan ibn Majah. This is hadith 3515. So there was a family among the Ansar called Al-Amir bin Hazm who used to recite Ruqya for the scorpion sting. Okay, so this is pre-Islamic times. But the Messenger of Allah forbade Ruqya. So they came to him and said, you have forbidden it, but we recite it against the scorpion sting. And Muhammad says, recite it for me. And they do. And he says, there's nothing wrong with this, so you can do it. And so clearly we have what looks like generic incantations in the hadith that are simply not specified. We also have pre-Islamic incantations, and then we have incantations that are tied directly to surahs 113 and 114. Now let's move into Muhammad. I mentioned hair before, okay, and blowing on knots. What is all of this stuff? So there's this ancient belief that goes back, actually, we see this in the Hebrew Bible. We see this in Akkadian as well. The Hebrew word is chover. We see it in Deuteronomy 18. And it refers to the magical practice of tying a string around something. And then you breathe into the knots as you're tying the knots, or you speak into them, a spell or an incantation, or you spit into the knots. And this is a way of binding the power of the spell into the knots themselves. So it keeps the spell in there and keeps it from getting out. And so the hadith that we're about to read, and this is Muhammad's bewitching, it has to do with his hair. Why does it have to do with his hair? Because of this ancient conception of not magic. And I'll just go ahead and read Surah 113. This is, seeking refuge from various things, Surahs 113 and 114. And verse 4 says, seeking refuge from the evil of the women who blow on knots. And once again, that's another folklore tradition. It's blue-eyed people. You have to watch out for people like me with the evil eye. But it's also traditionally old women in these magical texts. And so honestly, when we see movies, like Disney movies, and the witch is an old woman, these things actually have a basis in the folklore itself. And so when we talk about knot magic, K-N-O-T, tying knots, that's what we're talking about. So that's one of the interesting details of this hadith that we're about to read. with Muhammad's bewitching, and there are a couple of more. There are variant traditions here. I've read articles that try to, through form critical analysis, establish the earliest tradition, like scholars do, and so forth. We'll just take this as it comes to us from Sahih al-Bukhari. So this is Allah's messenger was affected by magic, and we know from other hadith that this magic had something to do with his sex life. And he was affected so much that he used to think that he had done something which, in fact, he did not do. It's not said explicitly, but that thing, of course, was having intercourse with his wives.
Bless his heart. Yeah,
bless his heart. And he invoked his Lord. Don't make me laugh. Okay. Do you know that Allah has advised me as to the problem I consulted him about? And so he's telling Aisha, hey, I have the answer. And so Aisha says, okay, what's up? And so then Muhammad begins to tell a story. Two people came and visited him, and they had a conversation, and their conversation is how Muhammad finds out what happened. The former asked, with what did he work the magic on Muhammad? The latter replied, with a comb and the hair. Comb and hair, all right, and catch this part. And the skin of pollen of a date palm tree. Okay, so comb, hair, pollen. We talk about some weird stuff, don't we? And so Muhammad is aware then, he's made aware of where all of this stuff is. It's in a well. He goes to the well and so forth. Aisha asks a question. O Allah's messenger, why didn't you take out the skin of the pollen? And Muhammad just brushes her question off. He says, I'm healed. I'm fine. End of discussion. There's a variant tradition. I want to read part of this as well. And this is from Sunan an-Nasai. It's always the Jews, okay? It's always the Jews. Here we go.
I know. That's the default, my friend. We always blame the Jews for anything that happens to us in our life.
A Jewish man cast a spell on the prophet, okay? And so here we have the same tradition. And then Jibril this time comes to him and says, a Jewish man has put a spell on you. In such and such a well, there is a knot that he tied for you. And some traditions even talk about even having a figure of Muhammad that this knot was tied around. Some traditions specify the number of knots, which corresponds to the number of verses in Surahs 113 and 114, etc. The point is, there was a man, possibly a Jewish man, who bewitched Muhammad by taking his hair and manipulating it with knots, as well as using this very strange detail, the skin of pollen of a date palm tree. And so it turns out that I'm not a botanist, but there's a characteristic of this date palm tree and the pollen that resembles in some way male reproductive fluid. And so what this Jewish man ostensibly did is he took Muhammad's hair and, okay, how are you going to target this spell? And what aspect of Muhammad's life are you going to affect? He goes for his sexual life. And so he uses this part of a tree that in some way resembles, once again, male reproductive fluid. And that's how he binds the spell into the knots, and he successfully bewitches Muhammad. So very interesting how affected Muhammad was by these things. Now,
amen. And you mentioned chapter 113 and 114. What's so interesting about those, of course, is anytime you read them, you read the commentaries on them, this story pops up usually, as that's the cause behind it. But what's so interesting also, Ibn Mas'ud did not believe they were actually revelations from the Quran, that they were just prayers that Muhammad was doing to fend off this effect of this witchcrafting that was, or magic, I should say, that was imposed on him.
Right. And just as a cold reader, I have to be in favor of Abdullah ibn Masud on this. I mean, if you're a Muslim and you imagine the Quran is the speech of Allah, how can you imagine Allah saying this? That I take refuge from the evil women who blow on knots and so forth. It seems very out of character.
Not only that, brother, but at the beginning it says, I also take refuge from the evil that I have created. I mean, that's amazing. So the God of Islam actually says that he created evil, and he's not happy with everything that he has done as well. So
yeah, that's actually not something that's too unusual, though, about Allah creating evil. And a lot of Muslims don't like that I've brought this up, but this is Surah 91, and we're going off. There's so many rabbit trails, but we'll go off on this rabbit trail for a little while. This is, swearing. Allah swears by everything. By the earth and what spread it, Surah 91:6. By the self and what fashioned it, and instilled it with its depravity and its guarding. And translations here will add something. Instilled it with its knowledge of depravity and knowledge of righteousness or something like that. But that's not what's in the text. And so here we have Allah, along with this theme of kind of, creating evil. Here Allah is instilling the soul as he fashions it with depravity. It's very interesting and, objectionable theologically. Many Muslims don't like that. But when you think about it, the Quran over and over says that Allah sends people astray. He guides some, he sends others astray. How else does he do that? Well, he instills their souls with depravity. And so, when we think about the evil that he created, it's really not that out of character with some of the things that we see in the Quran and some of these, general Quranic themes as a whole. But we have poor Muslims. Okay, it wasn't just Muhammad. Okay, it's also you. This is as we're about 14 minutes left. I'll kind of skim through a couple of these hadith. And so Muhammad said, during your sleep, Satan knots 3 knots. And now we know what we're talking about, this ancient magical practice of binding someone with a magical spell by tying knots. And that's what's in view here. During your sleep, Satan knots 3 knots at the back of the head of each of you. And he breathes the following words. Once again, just what I said, how these spells are carried out. And he breathes this spell in and so forth and so on. And then it's incumbent on the Muslim to wake up and to say such and such, to release each one of these knots and to unbind himself from the spell of Satan. But Satan is very close to Muslims in general. Okay, so I'll just read a couple more hadith. Sahih Muslim 20:33. Satan is present with any of you in everything he does. He is even present when he eats food. And so if any of you drops a mouthful, he should remove away anything filthy on it and eat it and not leave it for the devil. And when he finishes, he should lick his fingers because there might be some blessing there. Muhammad again, arrange the rows in order, stand shoulder to shoulder, close the gaps, be accommodating to your brothers, and do not leave gaps for Satan. And then, of course, when you wake up in the morning, you're supposed to wash in a certain way because Satan has stayed in the upper part of your nose all the night. So we can stop at this point and say, okay, how was Muhammad affected by all of this? Because we have Surah 1699, and we'll try to look at this in more detail as we wrap this live stream up. But for now, I'll just quote Surah 1699. Surely he, the accursed Satan, has no authority over those who believe and put their trust in the Lord. And we see that Muhammad was under the control of Satan and black magic numerous times. And so we have to ask, how does Satan have authority over someone who believes and puts their trust in the Lord, particularly Muhammad himself? And so that's one layer of protection. Just pause for a second and think about the layers of protection Muhammad had. Surah 1699 is one of them. Surahs 113 and 114, which he recited. But who else recited them? Jibreel, right? So that's another layer of protection. So you have Surah 1699, 113, and 114 that both he and Jibreel recited for him. And then you also have the Ajwa dates, right? You're supposed to eat 7 Ajwa dates, and you're protected from what? Right. You're protected from magic, and you're protected from poison. And so somehow, in spite of all of these layers of protection, Muhammad was still influenced by Satan and by black
Not
magic.
to mention the satanic verse incident, that's another troubling one and damaging to all of this.
Yeah, absolutely. And we could also compare it to Umar. We won't go take the time to do this, but Satan runs from Umar. Really interesting, because he doesn't seem to run to Muhammad or run from Muhammad. So we have some examples now of just the general framework that Muhammad conceived of magic and the evil eye and so forth. And we see that he forbid sorcery, but then he didn't forbid sorcery. Sometimes he recommended magic, and sometimes he commanded it outright. So this is the prophet like Moses that we're talking about. Keep that in mind as we go into Deuteronomy 18:10 and following. There shall not be found among you anyone who burns his sons or his daughter as an offering, anyone who practices divination, and then here comes the grocery list: divination, or tells fortunes, or interprets omens, or a sorcerer, or a charmer, or a medium, or a necromancer, or anyone who inquires of the dead. For whoever does these things is an abomination to the Lord. The things that Muhammad did and told his followers to do are abominations. And the two things that we would want to focus on that we've been talking about tonight would be the practices encompassed under what the ESV is translated sorcerer at the end of verse 10, or charmer at the beginning of verse 11. And Moses continues, "You shall be blameless before the Lord your God, for these nations which you are about to dispossess, they listen to these fortune tellers and these diviners. But as for you, the Lord your God has not allowed you to do this." And so once again, we think of the focus. Muhammad, whether it's he said it or it's put into his mouth, he's worried about shirk, right? That's the concern, pure monotheism. Moses is concerned more generally with how these people, how the ancient Israelites are to interact with the supernatural world, and they're only to do so through approved means, and that would be through the prophetic office that God initiates. We could read other hadith about Muhammad being ill himself when he recited magical formulas and spat, and sometimes he would breathe as he would recite these formulas, and he would rub this all over his body. And so once again, we see Muhammad messing around with things that Moses explicitly prohibited.
Right.
And
then the interesting thing, brother, is that, you find that the Bible talks about believers, that Satan will not have any power, basically, to possess them. For instance, that he who is in us is greater than the one who's in the world. That Jesus taught us to cast demons out by the power of his name. And yet here is Muhammad, who was confused about Satan, didn't know if it was Gabriel or Satan talking to him. He didn't know at the incident in the cave for the first time if that was a demonic being that spoke to him. He came uncovered, himself, and was shaken, and so on and so forth. And then you see later that he himself was a victim of acts like this. So, I mean, it's a good way that you're wrapping it into Deuteronomy, because how often do we hear Muslims saying that he's a prophet like Moses? Really? I mean, we just blew that that case out the door completely.
Yeah, it's interesting, and I've remarked before that if you go forward from Deuteronomy 18:18, you run into Deuteronomy 18:20, which is problematic for the satanic verses, and that's a completely valid criticism. But you can also move backwards earlier in the chapter, and we find Muhammad violating a whole bunch of things that Moses listed. And so it's just extremely ironic that no matter where you go in Deuteronomy 18, it's not Muhammad, but that's where Muslims want to point us. It's very curious. I also like what you said about Muhammad. That the way I think about it when it comes to magic and the evil eye is he is just a product of his time. He's just going along with the other beliefs. And we also see primarily that he's reactionary. Somebody is afflicted with the evil eye. Okay, do this. And then other times we see Muhammad, who's portrayed as very timid. And so he starts reciting Surahs 113 and 114. He's afraid of some sort of a demonic attack. And this is another good contrast with Jesus, because this is something we need to realize, even as Christians, and not lose sight of, that Jesus is on the offense in the New Testament against these satanic powers. So we have the temptation of the wilderness, Mark 1, Matthew 4, Luke 4. And what does Matthew say? Jesus was led out into the wilderness by the Spirit to be tempted. It's not that Jesus was out there fasting and poor Jesus, he's the victim, and here comes Satan. No, the intent was to go out into the wilderness, the place that in the ancient mind was dangerous and full of malevolent forces. And that's where Jesus goes. He fasts. He's in a physically weakened state, but he's out there to do battle with Satan. He's out there to show Satan, as we would say here in the West, that there's a new sheriff in town. But like you mentioned as well, Jesus, he's in the offensive there. He's on the offense again when it comes to his exorcisms, like you mentioned. And not only his exorcisms, but Jesus sends out the 72 in Luke chapter 10. And this is really interesting. We'll loop this back into Surah 16, as we start to finish up. The 72 returned that Jesus had sent out with joy, saying, "Lord, even the demons are subject to us in your name." And he said to him, "I saw Satan fall like lightning from heaven." This is Jesus speaking. "Behold, I have given you authority to tread on serpents and scorpions. These are once again ancient symbols for demonic forces. And over the power of the enemy. Who's that? Right? That's Satan. And nothing shall hurt you. Now I want you to listen to what we read earlier, Surah 16, verses 98 through 100. I want to give a little more context here. So think about Jesus' statement: power over all the enemy, nothing shall hurt you. Okay, here we go to Surah 16:98. When you recite the Quran, take refuge with God from the accursed Satan. Okay, now the view backs up a little bit. Surely he has no authority over those who disbelieve and put their trust in their Lord. His authority is only over those who take him as an ally and those who associate other gods with him. Satan only has authority over those who take him as an ally or associate other gods. So this is really interesting because think about that, how closely that matches the language, or the concept at least, from the Quran. Surely he has no authority over those who believe and put their trust in their Lord. And think about what Jesus says: behold, I have given you authority to tread on serpents and scorpions and over all the power of the enemy, and nothing shall hurt you. And so we have similar concepts. Satan has no power over you. Thus, it would be theologically problematic if we were to go into the book of Acts and see the apostles being bewitched, or seeing them writing satanic verses. This would be a major theological difficulty.
Right.
But instead, we see the reaction of the evil spirits. I love this verse, Luke 4:34. What have you to do with us? The evil spirits are speaking. Jesus of Nazareth, have you come to destroy us? I know who you are, the Holy One of God. And so when I think about Muhammad, this is the best way for me to conceive of this. And this is Acts 19, verses 13 through 16. Then some of the itinerant Jewish exorcists undertook to invoke the name of the Lord Jesus over those who had evil spirits, saying, I adjure you by the Jesus whom Paul proclaims. 7 sons of the Jewish high priest named Sceva were doing this. But the evil spirit answered them, Jesus I know, and Paul I recognize, but who are you? And the man in whom the evil spirit was leapt on them and mastered all of them and overpowered them, so that they fled out of the house naked and wounded. And so at no point during this live stream have we denied things like angels and demons. We believe that spiritual warfare is real, but we also believe that there is a proper way to interact with the supernatural. And the point of this passage in Acts 19, 13 through 16, and the point of what Moses says in Deuteronomy 18, is if you mess around with stuff you're not supposed to, you can get hurt. And this is what we see with Muhammad. He's messing around in realms he should not be messing around with. He's interacting with magic. He's interacting with mysticism. He's interacting with spells and incantations and so forth. He's being bewitched. He's reciting satanic verses. And so we have, I think, a very close analog to Muhammad with these supposed exorcists in Acts 19, who clearly bit off more than they could chew, trying to interact with the spiritual world. And so I just see Muhammad as a product of his time. He's reacting and interacting with these beliefs in the way that anyone else would in his culture. And I also see a significant disconnect between him and Moses and the prophets of the Old Testament. We don't even have to make comparisons. How many times did Jeremiah warn us of Satan coming to us in the night and tying knots around us that we have to unbind with spells and so forth in the morning? That doesn't happen. So there are massive disconnects between Muhammad in the Old Testament and the New Testament. And it's almost, I don't think, an overstatement to say that there's a theological inversion. What you are not supposed to do under Moses, you do under the hadith that Muhammad narrated, or you do under Sharia law. Jesus is on the offense, Muhammad's on the defense, and he's not very good at playing defense. And so there are, of course, other nuances that we could explore, the disconnects, the theological disconnects. But I think this is sufficient to hopefully inspire some interest in our Muslim viewers and ask the question: if Muhammad is in the line of biblical prophets, why do we see him doing this type of thing? Because it is utterly out of character from the biblical prophets, and of course from Jesus himself.
Absolutely. And what's so interesting is, like, when you study exorcism in the Gospels, you'll see that that's part of Jesus's declaration of the kingdom. and the fact that he is cleansing the kingdom from the presence of these evil spirits, demonic spirits, and healing people from all types of issues, including being demonically possessed. And our Muslim friends claim that that kingdom was given to them. It was taken away from the Jews. If that's the case, then how come their own prophet couldn't survive, or even protect himself from the very same demonic, spirits that Jesus rebuked, and they were terrified of him. And all he has to do is just tell them to leave, and they would leave. And it's just quite a contrast, brother. Thank you so much, of course, for sharing all of this detailed analysis, just for the benefit of people who are joining us. Once again, how can they go and follow you? I'll be surprised if they don't know, of course, about your channel, but just to be on the safe side. And you mentioned Patreon, so I want to encourage everyone to please not only subscribe to our brother's channel, but become a Patreon patron, because that's a way also you can support him. So go ahead, brother, if you want to just give them any more information about your channel.
Yeah, sure. Come on over to the channel Islam Critiqued and subscribe if you're interested in some traditional criticisms of Islam and some weird stuff like we've been talking about tonight. I'll probably break some of this stuff up into separate, more detailed videos in the future. And I do appreciate all of the supporters on Patreon. Research can be very expensive sometimes, so thank you very much. And if you feel like supporting, then you have that option as well. But yeah, I'd love to see you over there. And thank you very much for the invitation. And I've enjoyed our conversation.
Absolutely. And I hope you accept my invitation to come back again. A lot of people are asking for that. And for those of you who are still here watching, tomorrow at 3 p.m. New York time, I will have someone from Somalia sharing their testimony. The wife is tomorrow. And then on the following Saturday, it will be the husband. And it's really befitting because the mother or the woman in the Somali culture has a big deal position. So we wanted to do something like this. On Sunday, I will have Osama Duk to talk about Islamophobia, and it will be at 6 p.m. New York times. Once again, brother, thank you so much. We were blessed to have you. Thank you for the information and the hard work that you've done. And you mentioned that topics like this are on your channel, so people can go and even dig deeper. And they can Google, of course, all kind of things, but it's good to hear it, from someone who will simplify it for them. So I appreciate your work.
Yes, my pleasure.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. The Lord bless you, and we will see you tomorrow at 3 p.m. New York times. Take care. This is Al Fadi, over and out.